Your life matters, your story matters. And write it down and get it out there. And then, succeed or fail, at least you tried. And you grew, you learned something about yourself.
Unlost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Ansley Ashe is making a transition from wrestling mom, soccer coach, and library trustee to full-fledged novelist. She has loved mystery since she was a little girl, so when it came time to choose a genre, mystery was a natural fit. She loves everything between Sherlock Holmes and Mickey Haller, aka the Lincoln Lawyer. She is now publishing a series of novelettes based on a young female detective, Charlie Snow, with several novels still to come in this series. Ansley, welcome to Unlost Cause.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, David.
Great. So I know we're going to have a lot to cover, which I'm very excited about, but can you just provide the audience a 2 or 3 sentence backdrop of what was a lost cause that you turned into an unlost cause? So at least they have some peripheral vision as we start diving in.
Yeah, so I think I was 10, maybe 11, when I opened foot, insert mouth, and I was in this group setting, and I said, I can write that story better. And so it was a church thing where I was growing up, and they said, all right, do it. So I did that. That was a play. And that kind of got me my love of both acting, which I did put away in my teenage years, and writing, which I did not put away. And it seemed to me at that young age that a novel was this impossible thing to accomplish. So of course, that's what I wanted to do. And so since I was like 12 or 13, I just wanted to be a novelist. And I think like a lot of people, life happens. I went to college. I decided to study business instead of something creative because I wanted something practical. And I got married and I had kids and I became a stay-at-home mom. And, there's not always enough money to pursue something that is really, really creative. And so money was maybe the thing that made it kind of lost for me. Although I never stopped writing, and also like genuinely being a novelist is hard. To be traditionally published, it's not well known, but only 1 or 3% of people who try even get an agent or get an offer ever, much less published. So it's a pretty difficult world out there sometimes.
Definitely. And then, so growing up as a child, were you a voracious reader?
Yes, I did. I read, I grew up mostly on Little House on the Prairie, but my parents, so first of all, the thing that's not relevant in my life today, but was relevant growing up is 2 things. 1, my dad was legally blind and my mother is totally blind. And 2...
And can you share with the community, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so legally blind means your vision cannot be corrected with glasses or contacts or any corrective or surgery or any corrective means well enough for you to drive. So it's an inability that's typically there are other ancillary effects, but that's typically how legally blind is defined. And then totally blind is, you have virtually no vision whatsoever. So my mother was born with glaucoma. And so her eyes never worked growing up. And then when I was a small child, they were so painful, she had them removed and she now has, artificial eyes. So it's a difference. And so like my dad could see well enough to read and kind of a little bit navigate his world and ride a bicycle and walk places, but not well enough to drive. So we were stuck at home a lot. And so that's probably one of the things that led me to being a voracious reader. I have a natural curiosity about the world. But one of the things that drew my parents together is they both wanted to be teachers. And so they felt that literacy was a really important skill set they'd hoped to have smart children. So they thought it was a skill set. So they kind of were a little bit insistent that I read and a little bit like this was my opportunity to just explore the world, especially not having a ride anywhere. Oh, I want to go to that museum. Can't get a ride there. Okay, well, what book is there at my local library? Because that was close by.
And did you gravitate towards the genre that you eventually, like mystery, that you write about today? Or were you just exploring or escapism through all different types of genres as a child?
So I was not genre fidelity. There was no genre fidelity when I was growing up. I explored a lot of different genres, but if you ask me what I most typically read, it would still be mystery. I read more mystery than it was. In fact, I was a kid. So when I decided to not make it, to make my lost cause an unlost cause, one of the things I did was I downloaded one of the great courses that had to do with the secrets of mystery fiction. And what happened was I was going through and I was listening. I was like, read it, seen the adaptation, seen an adaptation, seen the movie, read it. And I was like, oh, right, this is my genre. And that's not true. I'm not as well versed in, say, fantasy, although I love Lord of the Rings. I'm not as well versed in romance, although I read tons and tons of those in college. I'm not as well versed, but broad, that's where I had my most interest.
Yeah. And what is it about mystery genre that, you had so much interest in?
So great mysteries are puzzle mysteries. And Agatha Christie is kind of the queen of that. And it's a race between the author or the detective as the author sets it up. So what we think of as detective fiction, it's a race between the viewer or reader and the detective or the author. And that kind of, can I figure out what you're doing as a storyteller? Can I figure out where this is going and how that was? So that did. And then, it's just Agatha Christie is breezy and fun to read, so, and a lot of them are.
And so, some people love reading, but they don't translate to writing. But it sounds like you built a bridge between them. Did that also start at a young age, or is that later on, or how did that develop?
Yeah. So like I said, I first got into writing my own stories because, I was presented with a play that somebody else had written, an adult. And I was like, I can write that story better. And they said, then do it. So I did. And I don't know that my story was better than theirs, to be honest with you, looking back all these years later. But that it was a love of what that intellectual challenge was of writing that story down. And I think there are so many parallels between reading mystery and what it takes to write a good story that I think I just gravitated towards that. And I attempted my first novel at 12 or 13 and didn't finish it. And then I started trying in earnest to do it at 18. And it took me 10 years to finish a novel because I would stop and start. And I read all kinds of things about how to construct a novel. What are the ways to do it? And I think I have failed at writing a novel in that 10-year period. Every single way there is to fail, where the characters don't make sense, the story falls apart. It doesn't hold together as a story. The side plots take over instead of the main plot. I think I failed every single way to do that. And yet I was undeterred. When I got that first one done, which is right after my first two kids were born, that was when I was like, oh, maybe I can still pursue this. And so that kind of there, but just didn't have enough time once the kids were born.
Yeah. And growing up, did you have any role models who wrote? I know it sounds like your parents definitely encouraged you, but did you have anyone who wrote, either like a high school English teacher, a friend, or a mentor who you're like, wow, they like writing, but then they've also are published or have a dream of getting published and they're working on something?
So a little bit of each of those. So my dad and his father both wrote, but they weren't published. So I had stacks of novels lying around the house that, an agent never picked up. So I definitely knew that was a thing. And then one of my parents' friends, her husband, was a playwright, and he would occasionally get a play picked up from Time to do at a regional theater, but it was by no means his major. But so I did know that writing was out there, but no, I didn't know anybody who was a novelist per se. So, but I did know somebody who had a little bit of success as a writer. So.
Got it. And did you have a very influential English teacher growing up, perhaps?
I don't know. I'm lost contact with her, but so Mrs. House was my last, well, she wasn't really my English teacher. I was on the school newspaper my senior year. And so she was really influential. She was probably the most influential English teacher that I had. She really taught me about writing in newspapers, crafting a story a certain way to fit the space that you have, and in as far as like hitting beats and things like that. And then I don't remember the name, but I had a pretty good professor in college. I didn't take any creative writing in college, but one of my like freshman, I can't remember if it was my freshman or my sophomore level English courses, we had to write every single different type of, and they were like, you're a really strong writer and you take criticism really, really well. And so that kind of encouraged me along. But for the most part, I've just been on my own. I would love to, I have tons of friends who are teachers. I would love to tell you, that these were really important people in my life that just kind of weren't. And I think that's a me thing, not a them thing, not a teacher's thing, I think.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And then you mentioned earlier that instead of pursuing a creative angle at college, you study business. So share with the audience where you went to school and was the primary driver of business because you saw that creative was a dream and it was just hard to make a living on.
If you had pulled 18-year-old me aside, right? Or 19, I guess 19-year-old me, because that was the year that I decided to give up acting. So I had thought I wanted to be an actor. So 19-year-old me, just as I'm giving up acting, there were only at that point 3 things I ever wanted to be. One was a real estate agent. One was an attorney, and one was a novelist. And being a real estate agent, to me, there are things about like buying and selling houses that I still enjoy, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do that as a job. And I'm highly social as a person. But it didn't seem to me like real estate offices that I had been in had big, huge contingencies of people. It's not like there were like 20 people in this office with a couple of secretaries or whatever. So, and I like to argue. So I wanted to be a lawyer. So I got the business. I went to Western Carolina University, which is where I met my husband. And at that time and in that space, instead of having a pre-law program, they had a business administration and law program. And so it kind of was like, well, my LSATs will be better if I take this one. So it was a ruthlessly practical decision to make to pursue that law degree. But I got sick before I could finish college. So the law career kind of went to the wayside. It's a really expensive thing. Again, money was a thing. And it was a really expensive thing to try to afford. But the business part was more interesting than I thought that it would be. So it was a really good match. And then when I came back years later, of course, the business degree plus the creative degree, you're going to go somewhere. So that made it interesting.
Great. And then share with the audience, what were some of after you get this business law degree and you decide not to pursue, you get sick and then you decide not to pursue law because you are more interested in some of the business aspects that you were learning. What were some of the major chapters that you went through, like your first major kind of real job and so forth?
I didn't have one.
Okay.
I got married and my husband was pursuing his career. And so I was bouncing around doing crazy things like being a pizza delivery driver. I worked for temp agencies, several places. Those were interesting. I got temp placed into a bank. I always thought maybe I want to go into banking, so I was kind of a little bit exploring. But I was temping and pizza delivering and all of that up until a couple years later, while my husband was establishing his career, and I was like a little bit at loose ends. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I hadn't made a decision. And then I got pregnant, and we had 2 kids back to back, and we couldn't afford to put them in childcare. And then later we found out that the oldest is bipolar, second, and autistic and ADHD. And then the Irish twin is also autistic and ADHD. And then our son, who's getting ready to graduate from high school this year, is just inattentive ADHD. So we're down to that. So my kids just really needed my attention more than my career did. But it was a hard thing to give up a career. It was a hard thing to give up a career to raise kids when being a mother is not the most, I love my kids, but being a mother is not a fulfilling thing for me. It just doesn't, it's hard work.
Yes, it's extremely hard. And then during that time, because, having 2 kids back to back and with the needs that they have, and so you're dealing with that first and foremost, how was that kind of flickering dream of like potentially writing? Was that almost snuffed out, or would it come up and down and you'd write as an outlet, or what was happening in the background with that kind of dream and aspiration that you had?
So a little of both, right? So like I said, the oldest 2 were really, really little when I put my first novel together. And I was like, oh, this is how that works. And then that creative outlet was there. But sometimes, I was too busy, or I was too tired, or it was just too difficult to do, and, you're surviving day to day. And so there wasn't just as much space to be, creative. But then also it was an outlet too, and put the kids to bed. And then this is my me time and I can write and it takes me away to a world that I create. Whereas, like I can be in my everyday world, but in a world that I create and I control, the answers to everything. And every word that comes out of a character's mouth is something I thought of. And it's just it's really escapist in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. And in that escapism, were you doing more writing or reading? Because writing is much harder, I would imagine, than like pulling up something on your book or Kindle and just, blowing through it.
I have, at last count, I have 23 first drafts of novels that I have not yet finished. So more writing than reading, but I did a project, but I do read and I do read really, really regularly. And so I write one novella. I used to write three first drafts of novels a year, but that is an awful lot to do. I am down to just trying, right? And not always succeeding. Sometimes I start a new project, but I do try to write one novella and one novel every single year, and then spend the rest of my time editing, being friends with the editing process. But that's what I try to do. But this year, I think I'm going to write a novella and two novel length works, plus all of the editing work that I'm doing, and a short story for an anthology collection that the final draft was due Sunday night. So.
And Ansley, to share with the audience, what's the difference, like word count or page count between like a short story, a novella, and a novel?
So a short story is usually considered anything up to 10,000 words. Even within the short story category, there are tons of things. There's like drabbles, and drabble is the one that I remember, but there's like drabble. And then the next step up is a novelette, which is usually somewhere between 8,000 and 16,000 words. When you get to the 20,000 to 40,000 word range, that's a novella. And then anything over 40,000 words is typically considered a novel. What is typical in the novel world, if you were to just walk out and this guy here, which is just a random novel that one of my friends bought for me, I outsourced because I would just get stuff I know. And so I outsourced one of my friends at a bookstore. This one, it's pretty thin. This one I'm going to guess is about 75,000 words. So it'll range between that 75,000 words and this, which is a very famous one that I picked up. And this one I'm guessing is about 120. We'll see how many pages it says. It's about 400. So that's going to be about between 100 and 120.
Got it. And then you mentioned, so it's flickering and you're, doing some writing. It's your me time. It's feeding your creativity and your soul. And when I was prepping for this interview, you mentioned that your youngest, I believe it was your youngest son, about to graduate high school, was a milestone. Did you have that kind of etched in your mind? Like, when this happens, I'm going to do this, or did it just happen to kind of line up pretty nicely?
So this is an embarrassing story, but I feel like when people say these things, they don't tell the truth. So I'm going to tell a very blunt and honest truth here, right? I messed up. My husband comes to me. So at this point, I've been a stay-at-home mom 10 or 12 years. So, right. And he says, what do you want to do when we retire? And I said back to him very, very angrily. He's very frustrated. Like I said, it's difficult to be a stay-at-home parent. And I said, I wanted to be retired at 50. And we're not going to make that, are we? And then he clams up. So of course he doesn't want to have this conversation, right? And that was okay, so you're angry and resentful about this, but that was me work that I had to do. I had to meditate, I had to get control of my anger. I had to understand where that resentment came from. What was it that I hadn't pursued? And the answer to that was a career. Okay, well, fine. But if I had planned on having a career and retiring at 50, what the heck was I going to do at 50? And it just so happens that I'm going to be 50 the year my son graduates high school next year. So it was okay, well, if I was going to be retired at 50 and I'm going to basically retire from being a stay-at-home mom, what would you do with that time in retirement? Do you want to travel the world? What is it that you really want to do? And I was you know what? Technology has come a long way. It is easier to be a self-published indie novelist than ever. Why don't you do that? Why don't you pursue that? You already know what it takes to be really, really good at it. And you already know how long those odds are. And you have a business degree. Why can't you do that? And the answer was, there was no reason why I couldn't. Once I fixed once I fixed my outlook on life, and once I married that to something, then it was easy to be open and honest with my husband. It was easy to start making, it's not ever easy, but it was easier to make that transition. And it was possible to let that resentment of this career that I desperately wanted. I grew up. I'm an Xer, feminism is like burned into your brains practically, and like women, I think were told starting in my generation that if you don't have a career, what is your value in life? Kind of more like maybe it was for men, all the time growing up, or maybe at least since the turn of the, 20th century, what's your career going to be a good career person, your work life is what's going to define you. And since that didn't define me and I didn't want to be a traditional little wife, like I said, that wasn't my goal. It was very difficult for me. So once I did my me work, then this became like this thing. And then it's like, I have this passion and we're just going to go for it. And I can't be 1 for 4. Like we're going to 0 for 4. No, but 1 for 4 is not a bad batting average. It's maybe not a great batting average, but it's not a really bad batting average either.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the transparency with the audience about, doing the me work. And I know that comes in a lot of flavors, a lot of timelines, and it's sticky, messy, and it's on a straight line. Can you share with the folks listening, like when you talk about the me work, what were some of the major things that you took on? You mentioned meditating, but I'm just curious because I'm sure there's a lot of people probably frustrated, maybe a little bit angry, resentful, and they're like, wait a second, she had a different outlet. How did she overcome that or cross that chasm? So I think it would be fantastic if you can share what you did.
So I'm a reader. So I started looking into meditation, right? And so I ran across a book that sounds religious, but actually isn't. It's called How God Changes Your Brain. And what it is, it's written by 2 people, a business guy and an MD. And the MD, Dr. Andrew Newberg, very famously studies how different meditation practices that different religious disciplines do affect the brain. And so he did tons of MRIs on that. And one of the things that he found is that meditative practices in general calm the brain down. I was a very angry, very resentful person. This is not how I wanted to define myself. I felt like I had known angry and resentful people. It's very easy to be angry and resentful and to see the things that you don't have when you grow up in a house that has disabilities. And yet people would still come to me and go, oh, we're so inspired by your parents and things, right. And my parents were like, there's a certain stubbornness to it. So I felt like being resentful was not who I wanted to be. So that's the first place, is who do you want to be? And I listed a set of characteristics, and then I researched what kind of meditation practices would work. I tried a whole bunch of them. There are like walking meditations. There are quieter meditations, like candle meditations. There are tons of meditations. And just finding that space inside my brain to let, the calmness grow. And from the calmness, then you kind of connect to my passion. Was easier to connect to you. It was easier to unleash my creativity in a way. And it was easier to be open to opportunities, right? So I felt like when I was angry and resentful, my world was narrower and I didn't see the opportunities that were in front of me. And once I opened up and I did more meditation and I calmed my brain and I increased my peace, and then you kind of have to search out your opportunities, or in my case, sometimes make them up. But it was possible to see them, and it was possible to have a path and to tap who I most deeply am and to be a better person. I don't know.
That's beautiful. And one last question on that is, when you talked about the calmness grow, I love that phrase. Is it like a binary thing where you turn the switch and you're calm, or do you have to keep investing in that meditation practice and you're doing it on an ongoing basis to, kind of like working out, you have to keep going to the gym, or, you're not going to maintain it forever. So I'm just curious for you, what has that been like?
So I don't do all of the different meditations that I did before. Like some of that was just, I did a set of meditation practices until I felt like I had a brain reset, I guess is maybe the best way to think about it. But then I do have exercises, letting it grow. It is, if you don't like going to the gym, I don't go into the gym necessarily myself. It is like going to the gym though. Like you do really I look at it like going to the gym. It's an investment in myself. It's an investment in my emotional health, which has improved my marriage, has improved my relationship with my kids, improved my relationship with myself, and improved my relationship with my friends. So invest.
Great. And then, so as you're gearing up and you have that conversation, you're like, hey, I'm going to lean into my career and the timing's going to be great with the kids getting older and more self-sufficient. were you part of like literary groups or friends group that was writing, so you were still around that energy? Because I think you did mention that there's a author by Lee Laxon. I hope I pronounced Z Laxon, his name correctly. And so I'm just curious, what were some of the other things that were floating in the periphery when you made that decision, or maybe even before making that decision?
So what happened was my oldest graduated high school, and I was about to get a whole bunch of time back. Like I had been really, really busy, but my writing was just my creative outlet. I was in 0 author groups. Today I'm in 4, which is maybe too many, but I had to go and I had to seek out opportunities. So I just had to go and see what was around. And it so happened that the year that my oldest child, or right after my oldest child, so they're back to back. It's 2021, my second oldest child, my daughter, graduated high school. That year, and this is emotional because of the controversy, but my National Novel Writing Month, municipal liaisons were retiring and they were moving on to the next stage of their life. And I was like, even though I had never participated in the group before, I had written and I had used the nano tools. And I thought, I don't want this to die. So I had no experience with any writing groups whatsoever. And I became a leader of one. And so I did that. And I joined the board of trustees on my local library. I did those at the exact same time. So I was looking for ways to connect into the community. And it was through being a library trustee that I met Laxon, and she and I, and then the other person who became a municipal liaison was me, Alexa. We created AuthorFest. And so it's through that I connected with Z. I connected with so Alexa and I had one local writing group. Z has a second local writing group. There's a regional writing group that I met through my nano work. And then there's a 4th writing group that was born out of all of that. So that is really how I sought out opportunities to connect with other writers because I didn't want to be alone. I kind of had bounced around in a romance community, 20 years, maybe not even 15 years earlier when my kids were really little and there were online spaces, but I was disconnected. I had been disconnected from that for a really long time. So I, just sought it out.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm impressed by is that you mentioned how you proactively sought out opportunities. And despite, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of surface area where you could say you could be a victim, but there's no hint of a victim mentality. It's, hey, I have agency and I'm seeking out these opportunities and I'm going to, grow my calmness. Did that start as a child, or was that, a value or like a characteristic that you got from your parents?
So it probably is something I got from my parents. I would say like guts, grit, stubbornness, determination. These are all things when you live with somebody both of my parents graduated college. So those were characteristics that served them well. I would say those were values that were instilled in me. I also felt a lot of resentment, and I could write that victim mentality, right? It's a choice to write it. I was always raised to believe it's a choice to write your victim mentality. And I found like it's just more productive to have agency. If you write a victim, I just personally found if I write that as a victim mentality, then the locus of control is outside of me. If I write this as what are the things I can do that I can control, then win or lose, I have done what I know I can. And so then I'm at peace with that. That's how I grow my peace, is have I done what I can? And I found that if I wrote that resentful mentality, if I said, well, we didn't save enough money, or you, husband, didn't save enough money so that we could retire early. Well, it's not his fault. It's as much his fault as it is my fault that our kids had these genetic disorders. Somebody had to, well, I guess we didn't have to, but I didn't like the outcome that was likely to happen if I didn't pay attention to my kids as intensively as I did. I didn't want that outcome for my children. Like I said, I do love them, even though it's not as fulfilling to me as maybe a career would have been. So I guess knowing about agency, and I guess it also gave me stubbornness, to see what my parents did, because my parents definitely had friends that were in the blind community who did not have careers, whose worlds were more limited. And my parents had options. And they did that just by having agency and by taking on the agency that they had. So I think that's probably something I was raised with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And then let's talk about the first novel that you published. Is this the one that you started that took you 12 years to finish, or is this a different one? And so let's start. Where's the spark lit?
Okay, so the very first thing that I published it's a novella, but it's a novella. It's called, so the very first thing that I published was I got together with my group, my NaNoWriMo friends, so that I met on Twitter, back when it was Twitter. We all got together and I guess I was 41 at this point. And we all put in a short story and I did a collection there. That was the first thing I self-published. And then I've been putting in novella. The Black Orchid Novella Award happens every single year. It is a very prestigious novella award. Chances of winning are incredibly slim to none. Doesn't daunt me. But I had this thing that was beautiful. And the second year AuthorFest went out, I released that as an ebook. And then over the course of this year, I'm releasing novelettes. I felt like when I sat down to edit my novels, I had no clue what I was doing. I was like, how do I get this to be more, like I had problems I didn't know how to solve. I felt like I knew how to solve a short story. So like when we were walking through the short stories, what's the longest short story? Well, that's about 10,000 words. I felt like I knew how to do a short story. So then I started doing the novelettes. So they're all about 10,000 words. I've got 4 out. There are 4 more to go. And then next spring, the very first novel will be out there. But the first one in this series is called New Year's Resolution. And so what's out now are New Year's Resolution, Jewelry Heist, Hero's Daughter, and Fireworks, which is my 4th of July. They're all holiday themed. So New Year's Resolution is New Year's Day. Jewelry Heist is Valentine's Day. Hero's Daughter is Memorial Day. And then Fireworks is obviously 4th of July, which we just had.
And, when I asked that question, I thought there was going to be more angst and more struggle because it takes a while to, get something out the door, especially if it's the first one. But you just rattled it off. Was that easy because you were building that for your entire life? I'm like, geez,
it's not easy. It's a ruthless discipline, right? It's part of this is the business school, right? So I went to business school. And so the number one reason why most businesses fail is lack of capitalization. Except for that, that's only like a half truth, right? Most businesses fail because they fail to have a plan in place. So I started my plan 2 years ago, like it's almost 2 years ago now, when I felt bad because here I created AuthorFest where people who had novels to sell would have a place to sell and connect with readers in my local community. And I had nothing that was ready to go. That was the kick in the pants I needed to do this. So when AuthorFest came back, I was like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this for real. What do I have? What can I do? And I'm busy putting on this big, huge festival, that had 1,000 people this year. The first year we only had 500, but this year in our third year, we had 1,000 people there. And while I'm doing all of this busy, how do I take care of my me needs too? And Z was really insightful in this because she's an immigrant. She was running her own photography business. She was releasing her own books. She was head of this writers group. She had 2 kids, one of whom, had special needs. And there were all of these things that I was like, oh, wow. And we were of a similar age and she just did it. And I was like, okay, well, we're going to just do it. We're going to stop being precious about it. But that business school's training kicked in and it's like, how are you going to make this work? And so I sat down and I did a plan. And almost as soon as I got ready to start executing my plan, that's when I found out last year my dad had stage 4 cancer. So that was a thing that threatened to derail me a year ago.
You've given selflessly to your family with, your kids. And then with the advent of your father being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, how did that weave into, your plans and prioritizations?
So creatives are not known for having reasonable plans. And so the original plan was to release. So I have in this series, I would say 2.5 novels. I've got a third novel that's not completed. And to be honest with you, I don't know that I want to complete it. Still undecided years later. So that's probably a no, right?
Answer the whole question. I love it.
Probably a no. But I had these novelettes that were sitting here, which were things that I was like, why am I not releasing this? And so but they take a course, they tell us this one character story over the course of her first year as an investigator. And I was like, I'm going to release all of them. Holy cow, is that crazy to do in like 24 months, right? Is to push everything out and to push them all out this year so that next year I could move on to a different character. when I was living 6 weeks in Illinois and 2 weeks in North Carolina where my dad lived to help my siblings take care of him. And I was like, this is too much. I was like, well, it's always a crazy plan. So that's why we're just the novelettes this year. And so I'm on a pace where I can push those out, but I'm also at a good pace to finish the novels, edit those novels that are sitting there just waiting to shine, and I can still write. And so it just gave me a really good pace. So it was a thing that kind of slowed me down, but it slowed me down in a good way.
And you mentioned, I wrote down this phrase, stop being precious about it. Does that mean like when a writer is just like obsessing about everything and instead of getting it out the door or getting it to an editor or friends to read, is that what that phrase means?
Yes. I mean, we're perfectionists, right? And we want everything to be perfect. And you can be also like, oh, this is my perfect story. And, what if, it's so easy because it's a creative field. People don't always like the way I do things, and they have their own way. And that can be a give and take. And it's really easy to be precious about it and go, well, if it were perfect, everybody would love it. But that's just not true. And it was, like I said, just stop being precious. You are where you are, and it is what it is. And I feel like, honestly, if I've made a really good faith effort to put out I know what a high quality product is, to settle for high quality or reasonably good quality, I guess. But I feel like high quality, what I feel like is high quality, it doesn't have to be perfect, and to stop being precious and hold on to it. There's no such thing as perfect. That is how lost causes become lost causes, is having that fixed thing inside my head, I felt.
Well said. And then you mentioned when I was reading the materials, you wanted to move away from no more if only, wanted to move to asking what would it take to, right? Well, what do those two phrases mean to you? No more if onlys to what would it take to?
If only I had known when I was in college, my kids were going to have this, would I have gone to college, right? If only I had enough money to do da, 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 da. I think many people do this, right? If only. And to say, okay, well, and if only I had a finished book, then, I could get picked up. Well, that may be true if only this were true, but what would it take? If only, again, that's about that agency thing, right? And that transition and that mindset of that locus of control outside of myself. And there are all kinds of things I can't control. I can't control the weather. It was 100, and the heat index for AuthorFest this year was 100 degrees, right? I can't control the weather. I can't control, the circumstances in my life to a certain extent, like if my husband's company decides that they're downsizing him out of a job, I don't have any control over it, right? And it's easy to say if only he hadn't lost that job, or if only I had finished my degree, or if only I had pursued this. So easy to say that, but that's the road not taken. Well, every second my head is in the road not taken, it is not in a book that I'm writing, which is way more exciting than that, if only. But it's also getting me no closer to my goal. And I just noticed that people who were successful, or more importantly, people who were happy, they took that locus of control inside themselves. And I read an article somewhere where they said, people who are really successful are self-centered, but in a good way. And the article goes on to say they have a correcting mechanism. Everybody has emotions. Everybody feels this wistful, oh, if only da, 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 right? And you fill in that sentence for, if only, I don't know, takes on, if only that guy had, winked at me when I was in high school, my life would be all different now. Okay, well, maybe it would be, but I mean, come on, that's like a freaking wink, and he's probably not worth it anyway, right? Or if only I had won the lottery, my life would be different. Well, sure, it would be different, but it would be different in a different way, right? A lot. And if you go and you put that, if only I won the lottery. Well, if only I won the lottery, what happens to lottery winners? They still end up 5 years later broke. Statistically,
not as happy.
Broken, not as happy and stuff, right? Because their mindset, their money's changed, but not their mindset. So the mindset is the most important thing to change. And that was the thing. I was like, oh, I could do that. And that's where in self-centered, they were like, okay, where is your center? Where is your calm? The person responsible for your happiness is you. And the minute I took that on for me and said, I am all alone in this. I am the one who is completely responsible for that. And then and I need to be open to the opportunities that are going to get me What would it take to, and how can I be open to the opportunities that are in front of me? And if there are no opportunities, how do I make them up? I made up Author Fest with my friends, I just made it up. I'm not all alone. Like, it took extra people to do it, right? It took having enough people. It took having the right combinations, but I put myself out there in situations, and there's one part that is serendipity. The right people come into your life, but it's also being open to allow that serendipity in. And that openness is there. And so the minute that I said, okay, it's all about me. What can I do? What can I control? I was no longer, well, husband, if you had managed our finances better, I could afford to have a book. And I could say, well, how much money is it really going to take? $3,000 to $5,000, is a budget, like you need $3,000-4,000 for an editor, $500 to $1,000 for a really good, cover, none of which I have yet, but still working on it. And when I was like, okay, well, I can side hustle for that. That's just money. It's just money, and it's just a number at that point. What is it going to take to get there? And I had like steps that I could take. Well, then when I said, okay, this is what I want, I could go to my husband with a specific ask, and I could say, we have tiny bits of money that accrue in this bank account. Can we please not spend this so that I can have this? And then he was like, okay, yeah, because like it was never going to be enough money to pay the mortgage or, whatever. But it was just tiny bits of money. And, sometimes he would go to a game. Well, he could find the money to, if you want to take the kids to a baseball game or a hockey game or a basketball game, he could find that money other places, and we could save towards this goal. And that's how he could help me. And then as he started roughing soccer games, a little bit of money went in there. As he got promotions, a little bit more money went aside. I side hustled, so grow my money a little more. So there were practical things that could be done. But the minute that I was open to, instead of prescribing for him how he could help me, allowing him to decide how he could help me, and embracing that when that came, that made my marriage stronger. Right. And that made me happier. It makes him happier. It made my kids happier because they're, have a less angry mom. So, yeah.
Wow. I love that. Yeah, it probably stems a bit from your business and law education, where you had that work backwards plan where you said, well, how much does it cost to publish a book? If an editor is, 3,000-4,000 or whatnot. And then, what is the goal is, like around 5,000, let's work backwards, and, might not be able to get there today, but at least I'll have little steps and be able to have that goal, have that hope, and, put money aside and time aside to get there.
And if you pay attention, like business school is littered with, the guy who has the plan to open, say, a business, right? But he forgot to include in the budget. So he gets everything together to open the budget. But then if you're running the budget, if you're running that business, where's the money coming in to pay for your house, right? And now all of a sudden your spouse is angry with you because that was a big thing. And then your business goes under because you're undercapitalized. Well, you were undercapitalized because you failed to make a plan for everything that you need. So yeah, a lot of being in a good business is just common sense, except for that you don't always know to think about it. So then that's a skill set of learning how to back up and, break it down into smaller pieces.
Yeah. And then in terms of, I think that a lot of people have aspirations to write a novel or write a book. I don't know what it is, but I see that a lot on more than I thought I would on Lost Cause, because I think there's there's some creativity, and when you have a physical book versus a digital, well, I guess you could have both, and audio now. It's just a thing that you produce. Your name is on it, right? So I think there's a lot of people who aspire to that. What, since you've gone through it, what would be like the top couple of tips that you would give them that are maybe one, more practical, and then in terms of the logistics of planning a book, and then two, maybe the emotional part, because it's not a direct line. There's ups and downs, and I'm sure some days you're like, man, this is just flying out. The words are just flying off of my computer or my pen. Other days it's like, I don't know where to start. Writer's block.
Yes. So a writer's block is I'll set them aside for a second. The first thing is, it's like, you can join me on Writing Quests Plural on YouTube. Me and my friend Coral, we run a YouTube channel. Well, we don't run we're part of a bigger group, and we're going to do Novel November this November. So if that's something you're interested in, now is the time to wander over. There's a Writing Quests Substack. Everything is at the YouTube channel. Just put us in Writing Quests Plural. There is a singular. That guy's also awesome, but he's just not me. And you can come join us, and we'll walk you through all of those processes. The first thing I would say is you need to understand what type of writer you are. Are you a pantser, which means you write by the seat of your pants. So you get like this big idea and you just sit down at the keyboard and you just type, and you go all the way through. And, then you get to the end and maybe you have a novel and maybe you don't, right? Are you a pantser? Do you live and die by that creative idea that is inside your head and they kind of smolder until everything is built up? And then the second thing, or are you a planner? And then for planning, I have a whole bunch of things that I could tell you to use. But the most important is whether you do this virtually or, this is the big intersection. So this is the thing, is note cards. So carry some note cards with whether you do that on your phone, like just a notes app on your phone, or I use physical cards. You can do that. Study and just write down your ideas. And then I have a literal vase called a jar where like every idea that might possibly be a story, it gets written down. I put it in there. And then when it comes time to plan my next novel, that's where I choose from. But then like sometimes something happens. So most of my inspiration comes from IRL stuff. So then once I go through there, we organize them. We carry them in our little box. I have a box just like this that I keep in my purse. And I write down potential scenes. So you're going to go from a nugget of idea. So like a nugget of an idea would be like the basic plot of a story. So name a really famous movie and I'll give you the plot.
Let's see. Matrix.
Okay. So The Matrix. So the basic gem of an idea is a guy finds out that his world is not what it seems. He's living in a computer hellscape and he wants to escape, right? That's your idea. So that's the thing that goes on your note card, right? And now you're like, okay, but now the character needs, what do you need? Character needs a name. He needs a motivation. He needs a set of characteristics. He needs character traits. All these things get written down. He needs friends and he needs enemies. You need to do that. He needs a struggle. Who is he struggling against? You need to think through all of those things. Write them down. Just write it down. And those things will come up and then everything organizes it into scenes. And so you break those down. I put potential scenes in there. And then I take my dining room table or my sister's dining room table or a big, huge table at the library, depending on how many. And it takes so for a 75,000 word novel, it's going to take you between 60 and 70 scenes to have. And so once you have 30 or 40, you start putting them in an order. Once you're 50 or whatever, just order them. And I lay them out visually, but there are software programs, out there that can help you do this too. And you just write it down and you just do. And then you just sit down every day. This is where NaNoWriMo was like so popular and where NovelQuest is picking up. It's like you just pick a month. And so we've picked November because the weather is really bad. Although in America, I think that's kind of a bad idea with Thanksgiving, but I don't make the rules. And then you just sit down and write it. Just sit down, carve out a little bit of time every day to hit that 50,000. So Nano is 50,000 words in a month. And I also don't like to tell you how long it takes, but median is about 90 minutes to 2 hours every single day. That's what it's going to take. If you don't have that time, sit down and just dedicate it. Just dedicate it regularly. 5 minutes becomes 10 minutes, becomes 30 minutes. 30 minutes a day. It may take you 3 months to get it done, but you know what? It's done.
And then for you, when you talk about the dedicated time to get in that mindset to write, I know that some people really like to preserve the morning before they get randomized by emails, kids, whatnot. Do you recommend that? And do you have a sacred time or is it like catch as catch can?
I've done a little of each. So I think for every person, it's going to be different. I am creatively, I'm a night owl. So all of my math, logical work, boring stuff gets done in the morning when my brain is fresh. And my creative work gets done in the evening when, like I'm a little bit looser and just bing, 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 and ideas come together. So I do it in the evenings. But I think knowing what time of day you're most creative, and maybe some people will have to play around with this and you'll say, okay, well, I can get up 30 minutes earlier. That's a popular thing. I've seen that. I'll get up 30 minutes earlier. I'll do 30 minutes, or I'll do 30 minutes just before bed. But either way, or I'll do it at lunch, right? Try all of those and see which one works for you. And at some point during the day, the words will come more naturally to you. That's when you should. Now, just because you may not have a job that can, you may not have, life circumstances that can. That's okay too. Just keep at it a little bit, even if it's not your most creative time, and think, what do I want? Do I want a book, or do I want to just let it go? And, if you find yourself not writing, then probably you're too strong. I found I'm too stressed, or my friends have been too stressed, you're too stressed to do it, or this maybe isn't as easy as you thought it would be, or it isn't maybe what you were necessarily called to be. By the way, it doesn't surprise me. Statistics show that 85% of the people, 85% of the population thinks they have a book in them, and 75% of those who think they do have a book think they should write the book. So that is what made NaNoWriMo so popular. So it does not surprise me that you run into it in your community at all.
And then in November, so it's called Writers Quests.
It's writing quests.
Writing quests. So what happened? So are you and your co-host just talking about writing, or is it open Q&A? So for the audience who are interested in.
So during the November, so we're going to have some workshop months. So basically what we do is we do a podcast like we're doing now. And I'm used to asking authors questions instead of being asked questions. So during November, we invite writers on and we ask them questions about their latest release. A little bit like, are you a pantser or a plotter? What is your writing routine? What's your favorite writing snack? So we ask them questions about what their process is. And then, but when it's not in November, we still do, it's called co-working space or co-working time. And Coral and I get together, we do little prompts that we put them up on the screen. And these are things just like that we try to make them really general, but to just kind of get your creative juices flowing. And we do 5 and 10 minute increments. And you can watch me write a story live. You will not get my whole story because there are going to be days in between when I'm writing on it, but you will get to see what I write on the screen. And that's what we do. And we do it for about an hour. We do it about an hour once a month in the off season, and during the on season, we do it twice a week.
Wow. So you're basically just sharing your screen and you're just like thinking about a story. And
Coral and I talk about it. We talk about what's the writing prompt? What did our characters do? What does that prompt mean? Where does it come from? And we try to think about, because both of us have been nano leaders before. And so we try to take you there are all these technical aspects about writing, and we try to take you through very gently, some prompts that would help people do that to solidify what's your conflict. Novels are driven by conflict. By the way, conflict is for your novel, not for your family. Okay. The sooner people get that want to write a book, get that into your head. Conflict is for a novel. That's what keeps the reader engaged. It is what makes your family angry at you and your life more difficult. So conflict is for your story, not for your family. Put it in there. So yeah.
And do you host these because it makes you a better writer, or is it more of an act of paying it back or paying it forward to the aspiring writers or the aspiring writing community?
I don't know. It's
a lot of time, right? That you could be writing.
It is, but I mean, I'm also highly social, and I also was also raised with this ethic that if you can give back, you should give back. And I think that, like, I don't know. All I can tell you is I find it satisfying.
And how important do you think community is for the first-time writer or the aspiring writer?
So you can do it alone. If you don't have access to a community, don't be discouraged. But if you can find a community, get involved locally. I think community is like wonderful. As someone bouncing around said, these are people who are like you. They shower as frequently as you do or don't. They love all of the things you love. So they're going to love all of your quirky anime or sci-fi, or in my case, Edgar Allan Poe, or whatever it is that you're into. You're going to find people who are also into it. But also it's a good thing because you're going to get a writer who's a little bit farther along on the journey. So maybe they've finished a novel, they can give you inspiration, and it's just a good thing to have. And you'll make friends. You'll make friends.
And for given your experience, when people start to want to write the 85% and the 75% that you alluded to earlier that, think they have a novel, they want to go on it. I think about the similarities around podcasts, right? What we're doing is, a lot of people want to do it, but most people don't get past episode 10, right? Because it's just like a lot of work to put in that consistent time, find guests, edit, etc. Where do most novels die or wither on the vine where it becomes like, yeah, I had that dream, but it was
day 10, like a day 10, like a day 1.
10.
Yeah, in 30 days, right? So if you're writing 50,000 words in 30 days, it's day 10, right? Because on the surface, I think it works out to be like right at 7, it's like 1,600 and some odd words per day. So like right at 1,700 words per day. And if you have a full-time job and you're like, oh, and so the words just fly off and then you get to day 10 and you're typically past, there's this whole technical thing, but you're typically past the inciting incident, that thing that pushes your character on there. And you're in what many people, novelists and critiquers call, and critics, just reviewers call it the mushy middle, right? And you're in that mushy middle. You're like, how do I get my tension to rise? How do I do this, thing? How do I keep my character engaged or whatever? Like, your creativity starts to die. Maybe you have not been writing, between now, you haven't done your work. It's a thing, day 10. Day 10 is where we see the most dropouts, and it'll peter off after that. And then, it's a surprisingly small amount of people who make it all the way to the end of a noveling challenge like that. However, what I would say is it doesn't matter if you succeed or fail. What you've done is you have been true to your own creativity and honor that space in you. If you have this dream and you want to try, I think writing your fiction on the page, this is the best place to take a risk because nobody else has to read it. That is between you and the page. Be as crazy, as silly, as, out of this world as you can. Maybe your story will fall apart. That's okay. There's no shame in that. This is about you and your story and the things, your experiences matter, your life matters, your story matters. And write it down and get it out there. And then, succeed or fail, at least you tried and you grew, you learned something about yourself.
Yes, definitely. And then I think you said as a child, you just thought that, writing novels was just, too much of a dream, too much out of reach. But now
Seemed
that
impossible.
Impossible, right? But now that you're pursuing this and this dream's a reality, how has that changed how you see yourself?
That's a really good question, which I haven't really thought of. What I will say is it's made me a happier person to pursue something, right? Writing a novel seems really, a good novel has a lot of layers to it, right? And there are all these things that have to be thought about. In the practicality, I think the childhood me would have said, the writer sat down and thought of every single one of those in the first draft. Older me knows that the first draft is just your starting point, and you go through and you revise and you work until the story gets better. You can add layers as you go. There's no rules against that. You can make your words better. It's not just editing. Yes, the trope of, are you going to agonize where that one comma goes? Is that one comma necessary? Yes, that's true. Writers do think about that an awful lot, but it's not the only thing we think about. It's not, the be all end all of anything. So I think what it has made me is more patient, and it has made me more accepting. And so I've just had to figure out what to do with it's just accept it as it comes. I think the journey for me is less about, it didn't change more how I saw myself. It was more, could I accept the person that I am? I think that's the big change.
And what about how has it changed how your loved ones see you? Like your folks or your kids or your husband?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. So my dad was really supportive of me when I had a complicated relationship with him, and he mellowed out over the years. And so, but when it was very clear that it was stage 4, he became really, really passionate about that I should do this. And I think part of that comes from, his mother dedicated her whole entire life to her kids because both of her sons were born legally blind. And I think he saw that growing up, he wanted me to be more like her. Personality wise, I'm more like him, but I think he really admired and loved his mother. And I think he wanted me to be more like her. And I'm not her. I love her. She was a great woman, but I couldn't be her because I can't be somebody other than I am. And as it became clear to him that it was sunsetting, this was the thing he wanted to make right. And he became very supportive of me. So it changed. So I think my dad's struggle with mortality made him more accepting of who I am. And that in and of itself gave me the permission, because it feels really selfish. This is a creative pursuit, right? I am not feeding children. I am not taking carbon out of the environment. I am not, out there, rescuing whatever it is, rescuing puppies like my daughter wants to do, or being a veterinarian. My siblings are nurses, and my sister worked in the emergency department. I'm not saving somebody's life directly by doing that. But novels for me, I am a highly social person, right? I would much rather be talking to you than writing. Having said that, I write and I read almost every single day, for 30 minutes at least. And books have been a real source of companionship for me. And I feel like I can kind of pay it forward to someone else by releasing it out into the world. And it's fun. So it feels really selfish, but to be self-fulfilled also means that the parts of me that need to give are nourished so I can give.
So in just curious, because you talked about being a social person, but then reading and writing. In the classic Myers-Briggs, are you usually an E, extrovert, or I, introvert?
Yeah. So when I took the Myers-Briggs the first time in college, a team of psychologists had to come in because I tied down so many. But there are two things that I definitely am. I am definitely an extrovert, and I score almost all the way around the extroverted score. And so yeah. So if I don't have, I would say I talked, becoming a soccer coach really changed my life. It really made me a lot happier because I added, I think, something like 200 people to my social network. Every single season I would come in, I would have 10 or 12 kids on the team, plus their two parents, plus those grandparents, plus all the other coaches that I had to talk. So it was a lot of people to add. And I was like, oh, I really do. I'm highly extroverted. So I am an E. My personality type is routinely clocked as ENTP.
I wonder because, is it because you are extroverted and talking with people that recharges you to give you the energy to go within yourself to then, turn it into the I creative juices in writing? Or because usually it's the other way around. Introverts need to recharge by themselves then to go out into a social setting,
This could be why my best writing happens at night, right? So I'll go out and I'll go to, say, my kid's wrestling match or my kid's volleyball game or my kid's soccer match, right? And I'll talk with all the parents and then I'll come home and I'm charged up. I'm ready to go. I'm like, oh, let's go have a workout, right? And sit down and just boom, like the characters in those worlds are there and they're vivid in those moments. That is definitely a thing. And why in the morning, what I would consider the more logical task where the brain is fresh and I need to pay more attention, or the editing happens in the morning. But yes, I definitely need to go out and talk to people to have.
That's great. That's also alongside like that self-awareness that you have about, finding opportunities, meditating, and, having agency and that no victim mentality. So I'm curious, if someone was to write a novel about your life, what should the best title be for that novel?
I go back and forth on this, but I don't know. She did. She did.
I love it. And then if you were, let's say, on your deathbed and you didn't pursue and you didn't pick up the pen, or I guess it'd be keyboard to pursue that dream of writing that novel, how do you think you'd feel?
So deathbed is not, I feel like that is a thing that is outside of my control. How, the stage 4 cancer, especially with my dad being diagnosed and looking at mortality that way. That's not the fear for me. I think the thing that is upsetting spaghetti for me, I guess, is my grandmother had Alzheimer's and she was locked inside of her head. And I think that's the worst case scenario is, what if I become unable to do this? I think I have written almost every single, off and on, but, more days than not since I was 18 years old. And I think to wake up and have the stories that are bouncing around inside my head and these scenarios and these characters, and to not have an outlet for them is to have that locked in there and to not have the ability to put those on paper. I think that would be the thing. And I think I have probably pursued what I can pursue for now. So if that diagnosis came, but I think I would be really, really angry. But if it were, even a few years ago before I really started pushing myself out there, I think I would be really, really angry and I would feel really, really cheated.
Mm-hmm. So then as you reflect now, are you proud of what you're doing?
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then for someone who's watching and who has a dream, but they put it on the back burner and it's like someday, or they have the if onlys, what would you say to them?
Yeah. Learn how to first of all, if you're going through your if onlys, what are your if onlys and how many of those are practical? Like problem solving is, what do I have? What do I need? Right. Well, if only I had $1 million, I could do this. Okay. Well, how do you get $1 million? And do you really need $1 million? Those are your questions. So start with the practicalities. But I think, more importantly, finding the agency within yourself, like learning how to center yourself and say, it's okay that I feel emotions. It's not okay to stay stuck there. Right. It's okay to have this desire, but maybe my reasons are just reasons for now. Right. And, for a long time, my kids needed an intensity that I needed to give them. Right. And that was a difficult thing to accept, but my kids needed it. And my priorities were such that they needed it. And I think I would have, like, if I had gone out and pursued something selfishly and had a very bad outcome with my kids, not that I can always control that, but I'd had a bad outcome with my kids and felt like I could have done something, then that would have weighed on me because the kids didn't ask to be here. So I have to be a good parent to them. And, my dad didn't ask to have cancer, but my siblings needed help dealing with his end days. My parents didn't ask to be blind, but they still have things that they need help with. What can I do to do that? You have to, but at the same time, still, you need to pursue yourself. And that is where, so I've been talking about novels, but I'm also a knitter. And there's a very famous thing called Finish It February, where you take 5 minutes every single day to just knit on whatever your project is that you're knitting or crocheting on. Take 5 minutes every single day to touch Monday through Friday, like it's a job, or, 10 or 15 minutes on the weekend, right? But 5 minutes a day, every day, to put yourself a little bit closer to that. 5 minutes becomes 10 minutes, becomes 15 minutes, becomes 20 minutes, becomes an hour, becomes the 2 hours you need, and it may be 5 minutes is all you have for 10 years. That's all you have for 10 years. But you know what? At the end of 10 years, your kid is going to graduate and go off to college. And all of a sudden you're going to be an empty nester. And in that moment, where do you want to be? Right? If you've put 5 minutes a day, your skill set is advanced. So look at it that way. Don't look at, I'm missing an opportunity. Look at, I'm growing my skill set.
Mm-hmm. And, one of my favorite questions is I always like to ask guests, what ask or request would you have of the Unlost Cause community? And I get some really thoughtful and poignant answers. So I'm curious for you, Ansley, what ask would you have for the community?
I would ask them to get in touch with that. If they have a lost cause, or if they're pursuing their unlost cause, to really get in touch with who they are inside and understand that that's who they are, and just embrace and love the person they are. And that may be a journey, but it's a journey worth having. The more you love yourself in a selfless way, accepting who you are, the more you have to give to those people, because your family is, for me, family is what matters. Now, maybe I know a lot of people can be born into families that aren't, but there's found family too. So family more globally, finding your people, those relationships, those are the things that matter. Whether you're extroverted or introverted, your relationships are what matter the most. Your cause is what is going to refresh you to have good relationships and to stay in contact with that. And just spend 5 minutes. I would ask them, spend 5 minutes every single day, if you're not already, touching that part of them.
And for the folks who are watching and listening, who are inspired by what you're sharing, how can they follow or learn more, or support your writing, or connect with you? What are the socials, the URLs, the book titles? And this is the time to share them.
I'm branded Ansley Ashe Mysteries dang near everywhere that I am. So I'm Ansley Ashe on Twitter and Blue Sky. I am Ansley Ashe Mysteries on Facebook, not on Insta yet. Facebook and Substack. My Substack community is growing. So come on over to the Substack. There are some freebies. And if you would like to buy, you can buy the four novelettes. It comprises about 36,000 words so far. So it's about 9,000 words to each of them, a little over. You can buy those on Amazon today. It's called 4 Cases. And you just type in my name, and I am up on Amazon. And New Year's resolution is wherever books are sold. Just my name. Anywhere you can buy a book, it's out globally. Probably 4 Cases will be there soon. It's just not there yet. It's business. It's the back end. It takes 40 hours a week to do, and I don't have that to give to that back end stuff, but we're working on it. We'll get there. My kid will graduate high school. I'm taking this whole next year off, and I'm doing only my writing and only his things, because he's my baby. And oldest kid graduated 2020, COVID wiped out their senior year. Next oldest kid graduated 2021, also COVID wiped out senior year, and all of their senior year things. So I'm going to do the senior year things because it's my last opportunity, and just enjoy this last moment of childhood with my kids. And then this moment in my life will be over with, and it'll be time to move on and embrace what's there. I could be sad, but I'm not going to be. I might be it's a little bittersweet, but I'm not going to be sad. I'm just going to embrace where I'm at in my life.
Wow. So from penning your first play at age 10 to publishing mysteries in your 40s, Ansley Ashe proves that creative sparks never really fade. They just wait for us to strike the match again. Thank you, Ansley, for showing us what it means to turn and, if only, into a full-hearted I did. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets. The Unlost Causeway, one story and one person at a time.